welcome to the 2020 Brain and Transcranial Photobiomodulation Virtual Summit. I'm Dr. Joe Doduro, your host. My guest is Dr. Daniel Bourassa. He's a chiropractic physician and research educator with over 30 years of clinical experience in patient care and rehabilitation. He holds a PhD in biomedical sciences and was the laser research coordinator at the Einstein Medical Institute. He currently lectures and teaches laser science and therapeutic applications for the American Academy of Laser Therapy. His individual biomedical research focuses transcranial laser therapy, or that's really what we're talking about. He's currently a third-year medical student in the USAT School of Medicine, and his main focus right now is photodynamic carbon fullerene applications or nanocarbon medicine. So we're going to touch about that. Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
So the question I have is, you graduated, what was that, summa cum laude from Life University in 1989. So when you graduated, it was summa cum laude. When I graduated from Palmer, it was laude how come. And so, I mean, you have your pedigree, you have your information. When did you first get interested in laser therapy or lasers in general?
Really, I became interested in it a little bit earlier in the late 90s, but I really got involved in the early to mid 2000s. Started with Class 3B Chattanooga unit. I still have that. And a little bit later, I got involved in cold laser spot fat reduction. I actually wrote a paper and published that, did a presentation on that to a conference in November of 2012. And after that, I did various types of the normal stuff chiropractic do for treating musculoskeletal type of problems, and of course, and started experimenting, reading some stuff about transcranial application and effects of laser on the brain. And, chiropractors treat a lot of traumatic brain injury, post-concussion syndromes, they treat patients that have this. They don't treat this, okay? Which is, I think, a serious error, because I've seen a lot of patients that really had their symptoms, their headaches and things like that are not due to the neck injury. They're due to the brain injury. And they never address it. And even the neurologists and people that look at this, there's no effective treatments. Medications, they've tried everything, and so early on it was psychosomatic.
Right.
But the brain, also heavily influences your cervical musculature. And so I think that was an area that I felt needed some attention, and I started looking at that. I just did a non-COVID thing there, touched my face. But I got hand sanitizer. See, look over my shoulder.
You got the Purell. You're ready, right? Well,
good. So
let's not go there. So I know that you've been looking at and using different applications. So your forte is, you're both a clinician and you're a full-blown scientist, and so you've got your feet in both areas. What are we gonna learn when we get done with your presentation today?
Okay. Well, the most important thing is I think there is a missing piece in photobiostimulation for treating the brain, and actually for all tissues for that matter, and that has to do with, we all know, we can recite how the laser interacts when we apply it, and we forget something on absorption that's very important. Is there are probably the best example might be, and it may not be a perfect one, but you all have cell phones, right? Okay. You have a carrier wave, whether it's 3G, 4G, or maybe soon to be 5G. Okay. We all understand about, cable and use of infrared light, near infrared light to transmit all this information that we watch our movies on our TV. Those are carrier waves that are used, okay? We have radio frequency carrier waves, but we also have light carrier waves. They carry a whole host of signals, and they do that through various means. There are states of the body, and this is really not so much discussed, and even in medical school or classical biology, which largely relies on Newtonian physics, they really haven't fully come to grips with the concept of the quantum cell. However, over the past 5 to 7 years, it's come on more and more and bigger. Much of the stuff that we are learning are going to force biologists to rewrite the biology books, okay? Perfect example, everybody knows about photosynthesis, okay? That's a quantum process that goes on there, okay? Energy is being converted into matter and used, I'm sure everybody understands the term entropy, which basically is progressive dissipation to, basically chaos of the energy. It becomes less and less and less organized. Well, living things reverse entropy for their own benefit. Negentropy is one of the terms, okay? And that's what we see going on. So those all involve something, frequencies, okay? It's not just the electron transfer, and it's not just the ion exchanges that we traditionally talk about in classical biology or biochemistry and that type of thing. So I'm not trying to, like I said, I haven't focused on this for several months because, like we were talking about before, there just is not support for this research from laser companies. And maybe big institutions, if you get somebody interested, they can pick this ball up and run with it. What I'm really doing here is an introduction, okay? And probably, if there's an interest, you'd go back and look at the PowerPoint again, and then go to some of the references. It's kind of enlightening. So
cool. I know it's going to be. So let's go to the slides.
Okay, you're supposed to be able to say it in one sentence, but I haven't figured out how to do it. Okay. Are we missing a piece or two of this puzzle? And frequency matters. All right. And what we're going to be talking about today is a little refresher on the physics of light, tissue absorption, interaction with electron clouds of biomolecules, coherent, decoherent electromagnetic frequencies, and the effects in cells. And this is not how we traditionally define coherency in when we're talking about light physics. This means that the frequencies are coherent with the endogenous, or what they call eigenstates of various molecules or cell systems or cells themselves, or not in phase with those frequencies. And so that's a little bit of a difference there I wanted to point out early. What are eigenfrequencies and their effects on the cells? And then I'm just going to touch on, because I am not, a technical expert on doing this, is how we can design the equipment to deliver eigenfrequencies to the brain, which is what we are most focused on here in this particular seminar, is transcranial photobiostimulation therapy. The question came on some time ago to me was, could transcranial photobiostimulation deliver coherent NAR light-carrying modulated EM frequencies to neurons in the brain structures? Okay. The fact that EM fields in quantum states expressed in several of the cells control morphogenetic fields, which basically is cellular organization. And perhaps more importantly, when it comes to the brain, is the ability to store and transmit information. Okay, normally this is described in a lot of literature and research that's been done with NAR light, deals with the classical biochemical model as opposed to the quantum model, which is really all about energy, photons and energy. Quantum was originally, a quanta was a unit of the photon, okay? Very important that I am assuming everybody knows what thermodynamic laws are, okay? Living cells exist in a dynamic state, and it's quantum critical that exists far from thermodynamic equilibrium. For example, when you light a match, you have this stored chemical energy, but now it's released. It becomes disorganized. It comes off as light and things, and it's dissipated. Okay? In cells, that occurs when we die. When we die, we're in perfect thermodynamic equilibrium. We don't want to do that, so we exist far from that when we're living. And the use of properly modulated therapeutic light therapy could augment this. Okay? And there are things called the quantum electrodynamic field. They need to resonate in phase, and adding a frequency that is in phase with this enhances that. And so that in the CNS may offer some benefit. There's a lot of evidence of scientific connection between frequencies and health. And I won't read this to you, but one of the things that early on they found out is the Schumann resonance, which is 7.83 hertz. Interestingly, we come pretty close to that and found that 10 hertz pulsing seems to be more effective than a continuous wave. I tend to use 8 hertz because it's much closer to the Schumann resonance, which basically probably existed during evolution of life on Earth. So there's certainly going to be some memory in our genetic code that is going to identify with this, and very likely from the current evidence is it's still strongly involved in our health and well-being. Okay. Another interesting thing is we talk about absorption, but you know, the pH of cells, which is influenced by hydrogen atoms, protons, can change the shape of protein. Additionally, I know we got into some alternative type of biology, but there's some interesting things. If people are familiar with work with Gilbert Lane, Vladimir Matov, Jakin, and several others that describe protein folding and what they call native protein aggregation and unfolding. And one of the things that Lane proposed is that ATP is not really the true energy exchange of the cell. Now that's kind of a radical type of thought, and but that concept has been put out there, and there's some information and research that supports this and goes against the classical model of how we think that the mitochondria produce energy. So, you know, I don't want to get too far off field because there's a lot of stuff that we can't address in this short period of time, and hopefully if someone's interested in it or got some questions and that type of thing, then we can respond to it, and I can point them in the direction so they can read this stuff for themselves. I don't want anybody to take my word for it. I'm just relating to in nanocarbon medical research that I've done, there's a whole different world of how, or body of information available that is never discussed in the classic healthcare educational models, because it's relying on this traditional biology. So moving on though, the aforementioned basically brings up the question is, what's the most efficient and versatile vehicle for delivery of electromagnetic quantum information to cells? And of course, there's five ways to do about it. Electrotherapy, radio frequency, ultrasound, okay, magnetic fields, and light. And all of them have produced some good success, okay? The first four, mainly the first, 1, 2, and 4 are heavily utilized frequency modulation to use their effects. Ultrasound, somewhat, as far as I know. I'm not expert in any of those things, but I know they do it. We don't do that in light frequency. We talk about depth of penetration and, oh yes, 810 light is picked up by, cytochrome 4 in the electron transport chain, and 980 light really increases, cell water, okay? But we don't look at the modulating our light frequencies so that we actually affect the cell organizational systems with their inherent resonant frequencies. And we are producing resonance.
Nice, nice.
Okay, everybody's familiar with this, okay? We got here. What we're gonna be most focused on here is what happens when it's absorbed. So, in just talking about that, light has to be absorbed to work, period. When it's absorbed, the energy in its electric field is transferred to kinetic energy of the electron cloud, or it can be through the magnetic field interactions with the nanoparticles in the cell. The brain itself has a lot of biogenic magnite, which surprised a lot of people, and it may affect what we see on MRIs fields. Everybody can read this, and I know that they've seen this particular diagram or little picture before showing magnetic fields and electrofields, which is a 90 degrees out of on the plane. So you got X, Y, and a Z plane when you look at that, if you were looking at directly down the center line of direction of propagation, okay? A little bit more on light observation, because this is long, I won't read it all. People can read it.
Dan, go back one slide, please. Elucidate for me what you're showing here. You're showing that you have a photon as an electromagnetic wave, right?
That's a field, yeah, that's your frequency that most people talk about.
So when you're saying the photon has a magnetic field and an electric field, a photon of light has both of these going on?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so that these two different components influence our physical tissue.
Absolutely.
Just like an MRI, you were saying, but the MRI is going to flip this a little bit and watch what's given off, you were saying, right?
Well, yes and no in a way. You're really talking apples and oranges, because the MRI basically exerts all the molecules of the body into a very dominant magnetic field, that introduced through the an FM frequency, and it aligns generally the protons initially as it started, and then depending upon the organization, how long it takes once the signal is removed for the atoms in the molecules to realign with their normal or their eigenstate, if you want to call it that, magnetic direction. Well, actually, that's not true, because the magnet makes all the protons go one way, and then the FM frequency actually knocks it off kilter. but it has to do with the organization of, and the proton concentration is timed on how fast that it returns to alignment with this dominant magnetic field. So you're basically, it's a very artificial type of thing. You're inducing a strong magnetic field and lining all the protons in the body along with this. Now, they haven't done, and there's a lot of other stuff that was probably affected too, but MRIs developed based on around the ability to do that. And interesting, cell water, okay, you can tell how much cell water is in the body or in a cell by the amount of time that it takes for it to return to the magnetic field, because it's ordered, okay? It's going to react differently than it is in, say, bulk water or disorganized water.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Well, yeah, because I think that this is, this is like I said, you have a magnetic field and an electrical field within the photon wave. And
right.
Then you're going to talk, light is electromagnetic radiation. So you're going to talk, there's an electrical field component and a magnetic component, as you kind of wrote out here. Got it?
Right.
I'm following you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and we had this slide, and like I said, the electron waves in the atoms, and they form these electron clouds, or pi clouds. And when electric field light interacts with them, it causes them to respond because they're charged particles, and that sets up a frequency phase or augments it, and with enough stimulation, there's and if there's a metal involved, you can eject an electron, which is what you're doing with the cytochrome 4 and iron mix in the porphyrin rings of those molecular centers in that particular molecule or enzyme. But there's also the magnetic field. Okay, the bottom line is both of those contribute to resonance. And that's really the important thing on the absorption of light, or one of the important things of light. Almost all biomolecules absorb infrared. A lot of the bioluminescence that you had mentioned in our pre-presentation talk, okay, are a result of free radical activity, and it's in the infrared range. Mm. So that's just an interesting aside. These are electromagnetic interactions, and I'm sure everybody's familiar with this stuff, okay, and this encompasses all the way from ionizing to, extremely low frequency electromagnetic waves. It's going to fall into one or more of those types of interactions. This is just kind of housekeeping to fill in some of the gaps, okay, and understanding that we have a photonic system, and also a property of photonic material that relates to the structure of their frequency dispersions, and it may offer up a new thing, and and that's going to interact with when we have this in phase or eigenfrequency resonating with the eigenstates of cells or organ systems or particular molecules in living systems. Proteins have these nonpolar groups, is where you see the pi clouds. Those are the benzene-like aromatic type of rings. They all have these electron clouds that basically, electrons can operate in both a wave form as well as a particle form, and they get together in that type of thing. You stimulate them with light, they can take on that characteristic, at least for a short period of time. The polar ends, which are your amino acids, amino groups and your carboxy groups are the thing that's sticking out into the water environment, and that gives the molecule a dipole moment. In other words, you have a positive and negative charge. Okay. These nonpolar regions are not only colored in proteins, but they're in membrane, lipid biolayers, and nucleic acids, and then also importantly in microtubules, which I think become very important in the quantum electrodynamics. And here's just a little picture showing, here's light coming in, release, and the molecular vibration, okay, the resonance.
But I can ask one question here on that. Can you go back one question? I think I'm in the little gap right now because light is a wave and a particle, right? So what you're saying is which part of that is affecting this molecular vibration? The wave aspect of it or the particle aspect of it? Am I asking the right question, or you can just dismiss it if it's...
You know, you actually ask a very good question, and I was going to put that in there, but I maybe erroneously assumed that most people understand how light interacts with the various molecular orbits, and how the light frequency, when it matches the energy between orbitals, and they may be very small, it causes an electron in a lower orbital to jump to a higher orbital. And matter of fact, that is in
this one here, right?
It's not big enough here, but you have different steps and you have different things, and I think they're showing it here.
Right there.
Stimulates it up, and then it drops back down, and each step that it drops back down, it can release a different electromagnetic frequency based on whatever that energy gap is. Right. So what light's doing as it's coming in there, it's adding a resonance frequency, which is basically exciting this electron who's already, the light's in phase with that electron, and jumps it up to a higher thing because it's put a lot of energy into that not molecule, but that electron. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. And it does that via the particle part of it or the wave part of it, in your opinion?
Probably, well, the question of light or particle, it's really the electric aspect of this this electric field. Okay, because both of these are going to affect it, and they're going to put energy into that electron.
Correct. I got you. Because what I'm trying to figure, when you're using a term like electron cloud or these, these type of thing, that seems to be more of a, like a particular aspect than a waveform aspect. Because you don't see a cloud of waves, you see a cloud of particles. So that's what I'm saying. The resonance cloud of electrons is going to be more of the particular part. Am I seeing that correctly?
Not exactly. Electrons generally are always even around an atom as simple as a hydrogen atom. Those electrons are still always shown as a field, because picking them out at any given point, they could say it's here from a particle, but it really doesn't totally reflect their character. They can exist in any number of probable locations around the atom at any given point in time. Okay.
The electrons.
But when they're doing that to move, they're moving at the speed of light. So, in whatever field they're in a vacuum, it will be the speed of light. In certain environments that have magnetic fields, it may be altered because magnetic fields can bend light. Gravitational fields can grip, which is electromagnetic energy, can bend light. So I tend to think of it at that point, it's energy, but if we stop and look at it, then it becomes a particle.
I got you. Thank
kind
you.
of dual nature. Because there's really, I mean, the mass of an electron is infinitely small. It's governed by its charge in simplistic terms. Are we good to go on, or do you have another question on
I
that?
think that was good. I like to see this. I like to see that it's a vibration of cellular macromolecules through external and internal electromagnetic fields. So not only is it giving off energy, but it's also having a little vibration. Because when I tend to think of it, when I tend to think about a photon, it's, is the vibration via the wave, or is the vibration because of a photon that's banging into something? So this kind of got my imagination going.
I guess I should come a little before that, but if it doesn't match the energy gap, it generally, continues on. And that's, you can see that when you look at the various frequencies of light, their penetration through tissues. You have, so much as, 632, 650 are absorbed a lot of times by the hemoglobin, and it drops off. You end up showing the relative on, a lot of the structures based on their absorption characteristics. So what happens to all that light that, say for example, 810, which seems to have some of the deepest tissue penetration in the NIR field, it basically isn't matching up to a lot of stuff, or at least not very well, so it can penetrate the deepest, whereas...
That's deep. That's deep. I like that concept. I like to wrap my head around that concept. That's a nice one.
Okay. The important thing is these EM fields, okay, they have discrete wave frequencies, and they influence the 3D structure and vibratory states of the macromolecules. That's what we're getting at. And being able to have that 810 or that 980 or that, 632, 650 nanometer light act as a carrier wave to be able to influence secondary beneficial wave frequencies, and we'll get into that a little bit here as we go on, which influences the macromolecules of life through their vibrational states. One of the things important here in light, and we never talk about it, is the vibratory nature actually produces physical motion, basically a phonon, okay? And electron phonon form probably an underlying what they call a soliton, and we'll get into that. But that's basically like an overriding stationary wave that life has to resonate with. And then you have all these subfrequencies. And the fact that all these subfrequencies exist, I think, creates an opportunity for us to modulate them. Now, some of it has to still be, researched to determine what they are, but they do know several of them. They have, and it's been published, and I included just a list of it. Okay, should we move on?
Go ahead.
Getting to the brain, consciousness is going to involve organized quantum mechanisms in the microtubules. Penrose and Hammerhoff had the ORC-OR theory, which is orchestrated organized reduction, and basically it suggests that the consciousness depends on the microtubules. And he was a psychiatrist as well as an anesthesiologist, and one of the things that he got involved with is that he was looking at how anesthetics cause or does what it does in the brain without short-circuiting out all the rest of the body, okay, and shutting down the rest of the body, because it basically stops a lot of the process going on in the microtubules, and by binding to it and preventing their activity, their transfer of electrons photons. I don't know if people are familiar with electron or proton tunneling and how familiar they are with quantum. So I don't want to get too deep into this stuff. Like I said, the main point is light frequency we know interacts with tissue and affects different organs, but there's a lot more frequencies that we could be utilizing to take advantage and provide therapeutic or inhibitory stimulus using NIR light. Okay, that's kind of what I'm going with, and I'm trying to give a little bit of a background to generate the interest in that. Can we move?
Yes, sir, you're doing great.
Okay. Like I said, the bottom line here, photosensitive proteins in the brain coupled to ion channel proteins underlying neural activity can be modified or inhibited by photons. That's, and in doing so, that's where we have the additional frequencies, I think, to really expand our effective therapy and maybe move it into the most premier type of therapy there is for treating brain injury and brain dysfunction and neurodegeneration. Okay, here's some stuff from that on the microtubules. And like I said, I put this in here to give you touch on a little bit of background to generate interest and say, well, you know, I know this and that makes sense or doesn't make sense, but I need to find out why it's doing what it's doing. And
well, as long as I have you here, you're gonna kind of explain that a little bit of the coupling and uncoupling, and you know, I mean, it's only you know, I have to learn a little bit too. But go ahead.
Sure. You know, the tubulins are that's what makes up the microtubules, and they are electron resonance rings, basically pi clouds, okay, in the amino acids that form them, and they allow or enable protein-wide quantum dipoles, which align with those in adjacent tubulins on lattices. And you can see one of the models that they have here. You got happy, it's going one way, and unhappy going the other way. And when it's not going on, it's undecided. Okay, and I gave you the paper that they can do some research at if they want to read it about that a little bit further. But the coherent vibrations, okay, that promote the quantum electrodynamics in neurons are what, you know, are important. And they do that by, at least one of the important things is through the microtubules of the cells, which are important for cognition and consciousness. Okay, and these microtubules vibrate. They expand, and you know, when they're excited, and then they come back closer together, and that creates a phonon. Those phonons resonate, and in fact, the quantum electrodynamics of the cell involve the microtubules, but also their connection with the nucleus, the DNA, mitochondria, which you know, forms close association with both the nucleus and other cellular apparatus, and you have this overriding, basically, soliton that's generated there, and the strength of that is kind of like a regulatory field that the cell uses to coordinate all these different biochemical reactions and information transfer both within the cell and then additionally the cell. It's not all, and it just, if you think about it, if cellular messengers were molecules or strings of certain, well, basically molecules, but these particles and stuff, if it was relying on that, how are they going to get there? By Brownian motion? That's extremely slow.
That's right.
Okay, stuff that's happening instantaneously, all coordinated, all going on together. You mentioned cancer before, and this is one of the things that we're looking at in nanocarbon medicine is what happens if the coherency of the cell, this soliton, gets weaker or is damaged, or, it's, first off, it's very complex. So saying that certain of the sub-frequencies in there or regulating energies start to weaken, that's where you can get changes or wrongful expression or placements of atoms, or say, for example, amino acids in protein sequences that lead to cancer or dysfunctional enzymes or proteins. Okay. The other thing that they found out is proteins can, when they're made, they're actually a almost linear, and within less than a second, it has to conform to its active form, and the chances of that happening by trial and error are astronomically improbable. It has to have some guiding information, because every one of those sequences in that protein could fold several 100,000 ways, but only one or two will work.
So, Doc, so what
There has to be an overriding field to stimulate this aggregation of the protein.
All right. Okay. So let me walk through this just a little bit, because there's a lot of stuff here that I wanted to hear. So just speak up so I can hear you clearly. But my question is, so what I understand is that you're trying to tell me that the microtubules within the cell are kind of going like this. And that is, doesn't it? That's
I don't have you on the screen, so I can't see what's going like this.
Oh, anyway, it's kind of like an accordion, like you said.
Uh-huh. Well, and that's one proposal, yeah.
One proposal, and this is creating a vibrational communication throughout other cells, like you stated.
Yes, a vibrational phonon that reflects an eigenfrequency, or the an eigenfrequency, or if you want to do that, contribute to eigenstates. Now, eigenfrequency basically means the natural frequency.
Okay. And then you talk
a complicated word in science that should,
Okay. And then you talked about the proteins, that is somehow encoding the folding of the proteins. Could you repeat that a little louder for me so I can hear it?
What was that?
You talked about the proteins folding, and so connect that to this vibration of the microtubules, because couldn't quite hear you.
Okay. Well, the phonon, or the electron phonon, which is called a polytron, forms a soliton. Fancy words, but basically they form a electromagnetic, or a frequency that's both electromagnetic and physical because it's vibrational, that act as a guide for cellular or molecular function within cells. That, like I said, forms an eigenstate, and you have sub of the cell, and then you have these sub-eigenstates at various molecules, and of course the various cellular structures, because they're doing different things, but they all have to be coordinated to work together. So there's an overriding field, electromagnetic field, and that, they think, is heavily influenced by the microtubules.
Very good. Very good. Very good.
Here's some of the things, and I don't think this is necessarily new to some of the things people recognize, but electromagnetic waves, which include light therapy, photons, lead to both healthy and unhealthy conditions, depends on the frequencies and properties. If they have shown, and that's what I have at the end of this, if you read Giesink and Meyer's work on basically eigenfrequencies and what's going on, they cover this in depth, and they have several papers that deal with this for people, and I think that's important that people would actually read this. And a lot of this here, the next following stuff, comes from some of the work. Okay, the non-thermal EMF biological effects include, exposure and intensity, which overall duration of exposure, which is the amount of energy you're giving. Okay, so how many joules are you're adding is a function of time, as well as the energy, the wattage. Intermittent pulsed or continuous exposure. Okay, now we're getting into something that we want to perhaps be looking at for frequencies. The wave frequency. Okay, modes of polarization, wave modulation, which we're kind of going on today, amplitude and phases, near and far field features. Okay, static, dynamic, magnetic fields. Again, we're talking about this stuff. And the chromophore absorption and oxychrome properties. Now, a lot of people don't understand the oxychrome aspect of that, but molecules, their bonds are where vibration or absorption is influenced heavily. And you see, for example, the double carbon bond loves or is very favorably absorbs ultraviolet. But if you attach, or if you conjugate several of these together, or if you attach on to, say, for example, a metal, okay, you put a metal in a portable ring, you start shifting the absorption band to different frequencies, okay, and that's going to afford the various absorption properties.
Dan, one thing on that slide, Dan. So when I see your list of 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 different components, I get a little bit more nervous, because when we're talking about like dosing and what is the formula that you're using to get in there with your photobiomodulation, these are aspects that aren't in the recipe. They're not on the label of the nutritional label, and it just seems it's a lot more thinking. Just a couple of them are being addressed. Would you agree on that?
Absolutely, and that's kind of my point. Okay, we're still arguing on whether LEDs or class 3 lasers or class 4 lasers are more effective. That's only a small part of the picture, and one of the reasons why we can't consistently establish, or to anybody's scientific acceptance, that it's going to do what we say it's going to do when we do it, because we aren't controlling enough of the variables. And a very important one involves most of this stuff when you start dealing with the different frequencies and modulating our whatever light we're using and directing it to certain tissues. You would use a different frequency for different structures and different cell systems or different targets or cell nucleuses in the brain, and also based on their depth. Okay, so those are all things that we really have to do to move transcranial photobiostimulation from being hey, yeah, that's an interesting phenomenon and it works sometimes and sometimes it doesn't, as a general thought process from the scientific or medical community, into, yes, we can use that in this case. In this case, it's not going to be the best way it's not going to work well in this type of situation, because we can't do this with it.
Can I point out that perhaps when we're here discussing direct effects and indirect effects, when we put the light on someone, perhaps these are the components that we don't, we don't understand the indirect effect, or we don't understand. These are probably some of the parameters that if we understood them a little bit better, we would understand the interaction with the tissue that we're putting it on. You see what I'm saying?
Yes. Okay. But you know, some of these things are still going to be hard to do because there hasn't been enough research to tell us exactly how we should modify one of those variables to achieve what we want to do. But that's because, like I said, nobody's asked the question.
What was that thing you said at the beginning, that nature, you were kind of talking about that nature
From Heisenberg.
only reveals the answer to the question that you're trying to observe or ask?
Yeah, he said something. I'm paraphrasing that.
That's fine.
But basically, yeah, nature's only going to reveal answers or science based on the questions that we ask. We don't ask it. We don't get the answer, and we only get part of the picture.
Cool.
Okay, I touched on the oxychrome. Like I said, that is basically a group of atoms or another molecule that's attached to the chromophore or a metal, which modifies the chromophore's ability to absorb light, altering either the wavelength or the intensity of the absorption. Okay, and so that may come into play in beginning to understand if certain things happen in tissues, it may change the frequency of light that they absorb. We work generally in the terahertz frequencies, and they have shown to be beneficial or affect structures in the brain. Okay. One of the big things against the quantum cell for a long time, saying it couldn't occur, is because originally they did quantum physics. It was done in this extremely cold environment and stuff in a vacuum where everything was controlled, and they said there was too many decoherent influences. In other words, it would cause things to fall out of phase in a hot, wet, noisy environment such as the body or a cell. And they found out that no, this actually it does, and nature has been using quantum physics, and many of the cell structures are actually designed, or living structures are actually designed to allow coherent states to exist within various cellular structures, for example, the microtubules, long enough to propagate the information. And so interesting, as those coherent and going from coherent to decoherent also creates another vibrational frequency. Okay, and that's going to be, once again, that's going to be unique to the electromagnetic field it's in, as well as the structure and everything. So those all form into a master or a frequency that we can measure, eigenfrequencies and things that we might want to target.
One second here.
Yeah.
The kilohertz to terahertz. What are we talking about as far as numbers? I mean, that's 1,000, 2,000. What's a terahertz?
Terahertz is going to be, I think, 1 to the 1 times 10 to the 12th power.
That's a lot.
Yeah, well, that's a frequency, and as the wavelengths get longer and longer, that's you're moving out, through infrared and radio frequency and microwave radio frequency and extremely low frequencies. Okay, all those things affect the brain, and I think as a side comment, we might need to start understanding. Because we have created a very artificial electromagnetic environment in which we all live, and it's been associated with health problems. Industry doesn't want to come to terms with it because they see a lot of benefits, to make money by utilizing the stuff. But what are we creating? We don't know, and we're not researching this. I don't know. Maybe that's one of the questions they don't want to have answered. And furthermore, like we were talking about your cell phone, if we're going 4G or 5G, that's in the gigahertz, okay? So those things are carrier waves, okay? But now they're carrying all kinds of other frequencies to, you know, have this wave modulated to carry bazillions of subfrequencies. A lot of those cause decoherence or interfere with our natural vibratory or eigenstate frequencies in cells. And we just don't know enough about that.
I hear you, Doc. I hear you, Doc.
Okay. Here's an example of the different IR absorption bands. You see it's starting at 1,000. Okay. And you can see this is going in actually, if we were looking at the normal electromagnetic frequency, that's actually reversed because it'll be going to our right. But that's how they presented the slide. So here's what I'm saying about how all these fractal patterns or eigenfrequencies, sub-eigenfrequencies in the master ones that make up this electromagnetic field. And this is called Hofstadler's butterfly, and while it looks very complex, think of it as that carrier wave. You know, the soliton is the carrier wave carrying all these different types of electromagnetic energy spectrum in it. And so it makes sense of the cell. It's just like converting a wave frequency, and then it travels through a medium, air or whatever, and it's picked up by a receiver, and that receiver can intelligently interpret it. And our cells have that in there, and it reads that information. And you can see, important, I just want to show you, this came, I believe it came out of G. Sink and Myers. It just, the point is these groups, they've identified 350 different classes of cavities that are comprised in nested 12 layers or fractals, which you can see that above. And described each cavity resonator as an octave musical flute that, together with silent periods, which would probably relate to decoherence, collectively generates the known brain rhythms that we are seeing as EEGs.
Okay, so this is beautiful, and I'm trying to get my fractal brain around this a little bit. So this is
that's why I had it there for people to read and dissect.
I know, but I have you here, and so I'm going to push on it a little bit and ask, these brainwave cycles that you put over on the side.
Yeah, you're talking about the EEG cycles, right?
The EEG cycles. Now, how does that connect? You're saying there is a fundamental basis in fractally organized, a geometric information that is expressed by our EEG.
Yes, it's these frequencies that we're recording here are basically a summation of these resonators that are going on in the body. And they operate on a certain set of frequencies, which is what we're going to get into here in the next few slides. But I want to put something out here. Okay, consciousness. Okay, or excuse me, subconsciousness, 8 hertz to 13 hertz. Well, I'll tell you, how many people, you know, are using pulsed, have tried to, or know for sure that when they're pulsing at 10, that their machine is delivering 10 and not 12, or another type of thing. One of the problems I had with the Aspen unit is it was very hard for me to shape the wave delivery or the pulse delivery the way I wanted to do it, because it was very easy for moving the space timings, and it would move to 12 or some other number. But there's a couple of studies out that 12 hertz pulsing causes problems. Mm-hmm. And you know, if you're particular laser is, maybe not as high a quality that it's doing exactly what it says it's doing, and you dial in 10 and you're delivering 11, half, 12, you might be doing some, causing the opposite and not getting the beneficial effects. Now, and if you didn't know that and you're doing an experiment and you're trying to show that 10 pulsing at 10 hertz, okay, is beneficial, and now you're getting effects or no effects, that's a problem. I think, in my mind, as a researcher.
I agree with you. That's a great insight on a technical basis of application. But can you talk about, because you're talking about kilohertz and terahertz, and in the brainwave cycles over here, we realize that that maybe our brain, we know it does, has these 1,000 hertz, 2,000 hertz, 4,000 hertz cycles. But we never read them
all the way up into
because they didn't think they were important. So what do you say about that? Because you have to have 12 layers in these cavities. Talk about that, please.
Well, that's where the complexity comes in, and we need to know what frequencies respond to what. You'll see on one of the following slides, it will hold that. We can come back and address this maybe a little bit better. So people that see this can relate visually, and perhaps it'll help you, because it's there. Your question is partially answered by the slide. When you see it, you go, oh yeah, see, they have looked at that. Now, if you're asking me about what we're doing with modulating our frequencies, yeah, that's certainly there. But once I remember, once I got above 100, I could only change it by 100. On the Aspen unit, and when I got above 1,000, I could only change it by 1,000. When I got over another level, I could only change. I think when it went up to 1,000, then I could only change it by 1,000. Well, there's a lot of sub-frequencies in there that might have been beneficial that I could use.
The tuning, I like it.
You just couldn't dial in the appropriate pulsing, okay, to even modulate the frequency of, I had an 810 nanometer unit to hit any of these sub-frequencies. If I read something that says this responded to this tissue, and I thought this was involved, I knew that, say, for example, ion channel or that particular structure or molecule in the body could be part of the problem, and I wanted to directly affect it. I couldn't dial in a frequency that the research has shown that responds to. Does that make sense?
I got you, Vic. I got you.
Okay, and so that's when I started doing it, I said, hey, we need to change our equipment. Okay, endogenous means the natural or internal electromagnetic fields and their resonances guide the morphology of biomolecules. There's a very good book that I would recommend everybody read called Fields of the Cell, and it was written in 2015, and it is a collection of papers basically by various experts in morphology and the effect of electromagnetic frequency, cell water on health and disease. So I have that listed at the end as a potential source for people that are interested in this.